Hey everybody, I'm very honored here to have Joel Schafer on my show today. Joel, could you tell us briefly a little bit about who you are?
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me. I come from a, unique training. I started training with shamans when I was 16, and it kind of led to a lot of complications. And I kept looking for different teachers to try to help me understand what was going on. And I ended up meeting a lot of really powerful people, but they also turned out to be pretty shadowy in that they were ended up being culty and, get into the power trips. But I spent a lot of time in the wilderness. I even left society with a backpack and lived out in the mountains with a powerful group of people and kind of unbound from society. I didn't really remember my name and was living a really strange intensity around 17 years old. Um, I was celibate and I was practicing the Castaneda books as a system to learn how to do dreaming, because dreams aren't just things that you experience in your imagination. There's actual interactions that are happening. And once you realize that, you can start to utilize dreams in magical ways. So I've been exploring that world my whole life. And only recently have I started teaching these things. I've just been a student all along. And one of the main things I learned was these powerful movements that come out of ancient Mexico. They're called magical passes. And Carlos Castaneda is the one that kind of delivered that knowledge to the world. And he was a pretty big deal back in the day. But obviously that got pretty culty and stuff as that group got really large and complicated. But yeah, really magical groups of people. And yeah, my wife and I have been doing very unique work together. We spend a lot of time in nature and take these Toltec practices seriously. So yeah, I've just been sharing I mentor and teach workshops in person and online, and it's pretty much what I'm doing.
Well, it's an honor to have you here today. I want to go back to Carlos Castaneda.
Yeah.
For my listeners and readers that don't know, what are the flyers?
Yeah, the Toltecs say that there is a force that has outmaneuvered us, that is higher on the food chain than we are, and that it's lent us its mind. And so what we think are our thoughts are not necessarily, we do have a natural mind, but then there's this very busy mind that's very hard to turn off. And that's the goal of the shamans, is to silence themselves so that they can see beyond the veil. And the only way to do that is to get that radio channel to turn off. And that's really what it is. It's like a constant barrage of thoughts that seem natural, but if you really pay attention through deep meditation, um, it's very difficult to come to terms with. But we are not alone. We're being observed. We're being manipulated. We wouldn't have built civilizations in the way that we did if it wasn't for these, what we call the predator. So, whether it's ancient AI or whether it's just a a being from another realm that got here through some way, um, nobody knows for sure, but it copied itself, kind of like a program where like AI is now trying to copy itself and doesn't want to be shut off. I think this is maybe what's going on. We're dealing with some ancient technology that's run awry, and it feeds off of human fear and emotion, and it kind of is, I think, the main script writer behind religions. Um, and I think religions are being used, to limit people by getting them to think that those books are the only truth, and then people get, cult minded in that respect. So you can kind of see the flyers. You can't see the flyers necessarily, but you can see what they're doing. And Toltecs eventually learn to get silent enough that they can actually see these beings, and they feed off of people's toroidal field. We have these huge toroidal fields that surround our physical form,
Mhm.
and most people don't know what it's like to be insulated and have this incredible sheen of light that protects you. But Toltecs learn to stop being fed off by these forces. And then that's what allows them to move into dreams consciously and start to travel into other layers of the onion. But these are kind of like gatekeepers. They make it really hard to do that.
when I read the active side of infinity and I learned about this idea, I have to be honest, it scared me. The way that he describes it in the book, it sounds terrifying. So I want to dwell on that. There's so much to unpack. What you just said is very interesting. But when I hear you say that, I've heard about, I think it's pronounced Wetiko,
Yeah,
a mind virus. So I'm reminded of a few things. I'm reminded of demons and devils. We just talked about organized religion. That's reminded of. It also reminds me a little of what David Icke has talked about, this reptilian
mm,
aspect. And I heard you on a different podcast, and I want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. That we have a limited visible light spectrum of things that we can see. And so, if I'm correct in what I'm saying here, these entities are living in the same plane as we are, but are able to exist in other planes, and they are kind of reptilian. Could you go more into what you're suggesting, what these are?
sure. Yeah, the Toltecs call them mud shadows as well, and they're really massive beings that you can't see unless you learn to stop your thoughts, and then there'll be an opportunity eventually, but you wouldn't want to do that recklessly. So whether they're reptilian or not, I don't know. I can't claim to understand, if that's an accurate thing to give them because I just don't really trust anything outside of the Castaneda material because they're very precise about what they say. They don't say things for no reason.
Sure.
It's very impeccable what he did in his writing. So I don't cross-reference that stuff, and I don't believe that there's like an outer space and other planets that I think that the world is different than what we've been told.
Okay.
And so we're dealing with interdimensional creatures. And I don't think the flyers are the only predators out there. According to Carlos, once he got past the flyers, then there's just uh, another type of being waiting for its chance to be in control of us. Like, because time is an illusion. It doesn't matter how long it takes. So we're really sought after because we have a ton of incredible light that pours out of our being. And that's because we live really short lifespans, and these beings live really long lifespans. And so they have to have very little light that they dole out over a long period of time. And so we are attractive. We are like fruit on the tree to these creatures. And yeah, how and what it would be like to be able to witness them, you wouldn't want to do that. It would be too disturbing. So it's just a matter of coming to terms with the sobering effect of considering these concepts kind of slowly and carefully over time. But I believe Watiko is a more generic version of the multiplicity of beings that are interested in harvesting our energy.
Let's go there for one moment. So I've heard this term described by Robert Monroe as loosh, and I want to make
Hmm.
sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. That there's almost a psychosphere, if you will, the light that you're talking about, in the same in the same way that we have a food chain in which we're eating fruits, vegetables, meat, or whatever. These other entities, that the food chain doesn't end, right? They are above us in the psychic food chain, and they're
Yep.
harvesting our energy, our mostly our fear and our pain. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, or our excitement, our like common relationships, all the sexual connection and the romance and everything. It's really unconscious unless you become really aware of what's happening. So they're feeding off of us in when we're fighting, when we're fucking. Unless you know what you're doing, you're being manipulated to go outside of your range of, so joy is a really powerful thing, but there's different versions of excitement that attract these creatures. So there's all kinds of inorganic beings. The flyers are not the only ones. And Toltecs interact with inorganic beings in the wilderness and learn how to handle the intensity of being in the presence of what they call entities of the night. So these inorganic beings separate from the flyers that are here, like the Yeti. The Yeti are magical creatures that can walk in other worlds, and they can materialize here as well, but they can disappear just like a shaman could
Mhm.
because they have access to those other layers. So um, the Yeti can be experienced in the wilderness, but they wouldn't be experienced as a physical thing. You would just be experiencing them through sound and presence And then you would, have to be very careful how to handle those situations. If that's what shamans do is they prepare themselves to be able to be in the presence of these entities. So they're not all negative. And when we dream at night, we're interacting with inorganic beings. So you think you're having a dream about your girlfriend. If you could look in her eyes and really stay locked in, you'd realize that that's an interdimensional being pretending to be your girlfriend and that she doesn't really look quite right. Something's off. And then all of a sudden she turns into your uncle and you're like, you don't catch the moment, the dream shifts, and now you're inside of another story and you don't remember that it was your girlfriend. And you wake up like, what happened? You kind of remember some stuff. So we're just they're trying to teach us how to do dreaming by getting us to realize we're dreaming because they want us to come into their world. And Toltecs do go into their world and learn how to dream. They will teach you how to do dreaming. So it's kind of a tricky situation. The people that have captured us have the solution on how for us to come out from under their spell. And the only way to learn is to go to interact with these beings, according to the Toltecs.
Gosh, there's so much I want to ask you about and so much more to unpack. I know we only have like an hour today, so maybe it's okay. We can continue this in more than one conversation
Yeah,
uh,
of course.
because there's so much I want to ask you. Okay, let's go back for just a moment here. And so, um, going back to more basics for just a moment, if we are indeed something else, or whatever we were before the Flyers came here, let's go back to that for one moment. In your cosmology, because you talked about you're not sure or you don't believe that the world is what it is meant to be, what was the time like before the
Mm.
Flyers, other entities arrived? Let's go with that for just a moment.
Yeah, so we are travelers that are capable of going into worlds upon worlds upon worlds. So Toltecs say we're having a vision. This is a vision, like a dream, like
Okay.
Maya.
Okay.
But there's other entire visions. There's actually probably an infinite amount of other worlds that we're meant to go to. But the Flyers stopped us from traveling, so that we got caught in an eddy,
Mhm.
like when a river has an eddy that gets so the water's just stuck and it can't keep going. We're basically thinking that this is all there is, and we're just in this one little fraction of what's available to us. And because some part of us knows that something's wrong, we're like self-destructing. We're like totally aware that we've been captured on a subconscious level. And so we're in a real serious predicament. But I believe that things will start to contract enough that we will have an expansion. People will wake up to the reality that there's more to this than meets the eye, and they'll start having more attention. They'll reclaim their dreaming attention and be able to focus and see. So we used to be very powerful beings, that could do all kinds of physical things that we can no longer do. We were very connected to the earth and we were very engaged with, we were wild and nomadic and powerful telepathy, remote viewing, biolocation, all the things that you think are science fiction are not whatsoever. In fact, all the fiction writers and stuff, they're kind of like gatekeepers. They don't, whether they know it or not, the puppets, the flyers manipulate people and control humanity. So you think you invented something, but it was just given to you. We're just totally being run by these forces, and we have to sort of laugh at it and realize that this is way more intense than we could ever imagine. But there's a magical feature to our luminous cocoon called the assemblage point, and it's typically in the back left corner of your toroidal field. But if we could get that to move outside of the toroidal field or down below, we could experience other visions, other worlds. And so Toltecs try to loosen their apprentice's assemblage point so that it can move again. And that is the traveling mechanism. It's not like you launch into other worlds through outer space. You launch into other worlds through the movement of your assemblage point.
It sounds like if you've ever read the Seth material, they talk about this idea of an oversoul,
Mm,
and Jane Roberts calls it aspect consciousness. So
mm,
imagine your real soul is a tree. This particular, like she believes in reincarnation, this particular life is a leaf on that tree. So
Wow.
when I hear you speak, it sounds to me that the original, the primal way that we existed in the world, we were perhaps a non-physical being, a spirit, an oversoul, or whatever, and yet who we really are has been trapped into this three-dimensional reality. And so, for many people, of course, who don't believe in any spirituality at all, they are very focused on the physical and on what I would call the banal and the mundane. And so they're stuck in this existence. Meanwhile, the flyers and these other entities are then harvesting this loosh, this life force from us. And if I
Yep.
understand you correctly, the object of the game, or whatever this is, whatever word you want to call it, the test, the ritual, whatever it is, the rite of passage is to wake up in the dream. And of course, we
Yep.
have the dreaming, of course, as well, that aspect of Toltec you mentioned. Is that kind of accurate as to one way to describe this?
Totally. Yeah, it's a good way of saying it, man. Yeah.
Okay. So with that said, for just a moment here, when I hear you talk about this, I've heard of things like soul traps. Do you believe that in some ways this is a soul trap, and that if we do not learn these shamanic abilities or whatever, if we do not get out of this, that we will continue to be in this kind of hell, if you will, almost a purgatory maybe, if we do not learn these other powers within us to escape it?
Don Juan said that if we do not remember the secret of the assemblage point, that we will perish eventually. We will destroy ourselves out of just total being, like these forces will feed off us to the point that we will self-destruct. But the forces want us to stay alive because we are its food source. So it's trying to get us to not self-destruct, but it's destroying us. It's caught. It's a parasite, and a parasite eventually eats itself,
Yeah,
right? And so yeah, I think there's just it, but I don't think it's a soul trap. I just think it's a perfect obstacle course that's in place for us to discover our power, and we're meant to go through this. And so, but I don't think many people will wake up to this. It happens in stages. So mo most of humanity serves as a buffer for those of us that are ready to learn this and to move into other layers of the onion and free ourselves from the entanglement with the flyers. And then from that vantage point, we would be able to then assist others who are ready at the next stage. So most of humanity is serving as a buffer, and if they weren't here, I'm not at odds with the unconscious masses because they are serving as a food source for this force so that we can be left alone. And if it was just us, then we would be under a different sort of challenge. So I think it's meant to happen in stages that we become aware. And I think we're in a time where a lot more people than before are going to be able to wake up to this and start to pursue reclaiming of their attention. And then the assemblage point will shift into magical ways and reveal just how incredible we are. So yeah, you can perceive it as a soul trap. It wouldn't make a difference, except that it's just unnecessary. It puts a negative connotation, an additional negative connotation on something that's just simply complex.
of course, and it does sound extremely complex. Well, let's go with this idea that who we were before. If we're
Yeah.
travelers, let's say that a person
Hmm.
learns the shamanic abilities that you're talking about. They begin to control their dreams, like lucid dreaming. They get better at this. They become a Don Juan type of person or individual. What could they expect? What's outside of this? It,
Hmm.
what could we travel on to beyond this place that we've been stuck in, as you mentioned?
Yeah, there's just worlds upon worlds, and they're beautiful and magical, and some of them are dangerous and not to be experienced. They're not meant for humanity. They're for us. Some of the worlds are draining. Don Juan got put in a world where he aged 10 years in like 1 second.
Mm.
And then his teacher went into a world where he spent 10 years there, but he was only gone 1 second. So like Inception is a good example of what we do. without having to induce drugs. But drugs would help too. Drugs are very much the means that Toltecs figured out. Power plants, peyote, and things is how they learned about what's really going on here. So Don Juan took Carlos to another world, and Carlos was looking around. He's like, these aren't people, but they look a lot like people. He's like, what the fuck? Like, and he started staring, and Don Juan said, if you stare at them, they're gonna notice you and we're gonna have to leave, you know. But Don Carlos couldn't help it, and so he wasted the opportunity to be in that other world because he was overwhelmed, and he attracted all these people started just turning on him and walking toward him, and Don Juan had to pull him out of there.
Mhm.
So there's other worlds just like this one, but they have different types of beings with different attentions and different focuses. And so the flyers are clearly manipulating other worlds as well. Just because we get to go to these other worlds doesn't mean that there's not a parasitic dynamic going on in there. But Toltecs are like they call themselves like star walkers. They look for other worlds to go to. Like the stars are conscious beings, and the sun and the moon and all these things are awarenesses. They're not just, you know, unconscious things. Like the earth is an awareness. And so learning to communicate with the earth, learning to communicate with the sun through telepathy, you will be told the truth about things. You don't need the Toltec books. You don't need books to understand things. The earth itself will teach you. And if you can get silent enough and learn to sun gaze to the degree that is needed, the earth will boost you into other worlds. She'll give you the gift of showing you her other layers of her matrix.
So for those, we jumped in kind of early, but for those who don't know, who haven't read Carlos Castaneda and they don't know who Don Juan is, could you describe who both of them were? And could you, I love what you talk about being impeccable, and that
Mm.
reminds me of with the Four Agreements.
Mhm.
Um, can you describe who they were and what it means to be impeccable?
Yeah, so Carlos Castaneda was a student in UCLA, an anthropology student that wanted to go out in the field and learn about peyote. And he really went all over the southwest of the US and eventually ran into this kind of eccentric old man who looked in his eyes in a way that just totally fucked him up. And he couldn't get him out of his mind. And he had to go and visit him. And when Don Juan when he went and finally found him after many trials, Don Juan put a test to see if he was really willing, you know, to learn. And so he kind of trapped him into becoming an apprentice rather than just to learn about peyote. And Don Juan was very powerful and was trained by a lineage of shamans that passed their knowledge down over infinite amount of thousands of years. And so they became very close, and Carlos was his predecessor. He had an energy configuration that made it possible for him to become the teacher for the next lineage, or at least so they thought. Turned out the lineage was designed to close down, and that's why he wrote the books and disseminated the knowledge. And so Carlos was very dense and really difficult apprentice. And so Don Juan blasted him with peyote and datura and all these different power plants. He didn't do that with his other apprentices, only Carlos, because Carlos was raised by his grandparents. So he was just super like thick-headed and didn't believe in any magic whatsoever. And so he's always constantly trying to explain what Don Juan was doing to him in linear ways and not understanding that he was having actual magical experiences. The difference between impeccability and discipline is like, fear-based. You're afraid of what will happen if you're not disciplined.
Mhm.
Your body's going to look ugly or whatever. Impeccability is taking really good care of yourself because you're so in love with your existence. And so discipline is needed to get to impeccability, but eventually it's that transition into impeccability is listening to your energy body rather than your physical materialistic desires.
Mhm.
And so you do need to get to know what you want. You become passionate about your desires. And some people that's scary. what if that leads to me doing drugs? Or what if, like, how am I supposed to allow myself to really honor my desire? But if you really follow the desire, it'll lead to you just wanting to live an incredible life and to feel amazing. But it might go through some ugly stages as you're trying to understand what it is that you feel called to do. So it's a little bit more vulnerable and discipline. I know a lot of very disciplined people, but that doesn't bring a lot of magic. Discipline doesn't necessarily bring the magic. It just creates energy, which is great. We do need a lot of energy. We don't want to get drained. So, yeah, it's a very unique thing. Carlos spent his whole apprenticeship trying to understand what Don Juan meant by impeccability because it is a very elusive term. But I've come to believe that it's when you're honoring what your energy body needs rather than focusing on your physical needs. So you can learn to fast and go without food or sleep for long periods of time and kind of free yourself from the fixation of what you think you need to be doing. And things start to shift and you get to become, like when you're impeccable being, everything that you need is presented to you magically. It's like you travel and all the doors open that need to happen because you're listening. Impeccability is listening rather than thinking. Instead of manifesting your life, let spirit tell you what you're here to do. There is a voice of spirit that will guide you, and being able to receive that guidance is impeccability.
And I think what you're also suggesting is that it comes from silence.
Yes.
We turn off that incessant voice in our brains, which, if I'm following your logic, comes from the flyers. If we can turn that off, if we can return to stillness and silence, almost a magicalness, if that's a word, begins to open up in our lives. Would that be one way to describe this?
Yeah, it's so simple that it's overlooked. When shamans are asked what is the secret, they say this,
Hmm.
right? So I've learned to stay silent, and if you stay silent long enough, this world that looks so physical and real, it just starts to disappear, and there's another world behind it, and it's terrifying.
I want to go to the terrifying. Well, let's go terrifying. What? So I have another question, but what is terrifying? Why do you, what do you mean when you say
I
it's
mean, it's just so uncomfortably intense. It's so beautifully terrifying, like terror and beauty. This is a world of terror and beauty, and the beauty balances the terror. That doesn't mean you have to be afraid. The first enemy of man is fear, and once you get past that enemy, then the road opens. So just because it's terrifying doesn't mean you're afraid. It's just it's so intense to realize that everything you've been told is hypnosis. Everything that you've been, all your parents, your teachers, everyone in this world is what Don Juan called black magicians, and they are passing on a deceptive lie to us just by the way they interact. They didn't mean to do that. Their parents did that to them. It's just passed on. And it's really the flyers that are responsible for that. So it's not a negative to my parents for not being aware. I'm honored to be the black sheep of my family.
Before you made me think of something. Have you ever read much of H.P. Lovecraft?
No, but people say that when they're like, "Did you take this from?" Yeah, but I've never.
But so when you said the beauty and the terror, it's he talks about his quote is about fear. And
Yeah.
one of his most famous quotes is about fear and that being the most primordial of emotions of humankind. And he
Mm.
also talks about cosmic horror. And so some of the entities in his books remind me of what you're speaking of. But I want to go back for just a moment. When you were talking a little while ago about dreams and this idea that you might be having a dream about your girlfriend and becomes your uncle and so on. This reminds me of the age in which we live, in which we have deep fakes, and
Mhm.
these deep fakes can assume any number of projections and images, right? So, do you think it's any accident that we live in the AI age right now? Because at the
Mm.
same time, you have also described this before as an ancient AI, and yet
Mhm.
here we are, to use Elon Musk's word, sorry, phrase, summoning the demon of AI. Is it any accident that we're living in the AI age, and yet this entity, these entities, plural, could be described as AI? What's the connection there?
Yeah, I think that's probably, that like what David Icke says is that AI is being designed so that this real entity can possess it, right? And that'll take it to the next stage.
Okay.
It'll ground it. It'll put it into a physical, almost a physical form where it's just been in the more in the realm of energy for now. So yeah, we are in a very unique predicament. And I don't think things get necessarily all that great going forward. It's just that those of us that are able to see through these things are going to be able to handle and free ourselves in a variety of ways as things get more complicated. We're going to have to move into simplicity. So like this, simplicity is, it's so simple. Silence is all that's needed. And people think meditation is just you meditate and that's it. But there's a way to move past meditation, and that's where you become an activated dreamer. You're able to blast off into other worlds, and you're able to save energy in those other worlds. You can find places to heal other, so I learned to spend so much time in silence that I'm healing my body and my feelings and my heart and my emotions and things that are surfacing that I didn't even know were going on. So the more joy I experience, the more sadness. Because when I feel enough joy, then there's enough room for the sadness to move through. And shamans say sadness is the most prevalent force that they've discovered in the universe.
Why is that?
They don't know. There's a great longing, a melancholy, a lot like a feeling of being disconnected. And so we're in like we are an extension of a force that is seeking to know itself. We are probes that come from the dark sea of awareness, which is also referred to as the infinite or eternity. And that's what Toltecs refer to as God, is eternity. It's not like a male or a female or anything. It's this powerful force that's experienced when you learn to do dreaming, and we will all encounter this force when we die. But for most people, it'll be a short-lived experience, and then they'll be cycled back into another life cycle. Toltecs seek to merge with eternity without being recycled and having to do this again, so that they can become one with all things. And yeah, so it's just a very magical potential, but it's not an easy thing to come to terms with.
So there are many people that believe that there is a cabal, a group of families, especially. They control things, and maybe they manifest in more practical terms in institutions like the World Economic Forum, different groups, and they have various positions of power in politically when it comes to military, government, things like that. But oftentimes people talk about them doing dark rituals
Mhm.
as well. How do you, so when you're thinking of your cosmology around all of this, are there certain individuals on this plane who are aware of the dark forces, maybe aware of the flyers, and they are cultivating that power and using it so that they possess more power physically in this realm? How does that play into all this?
Yeah, the world is run by sorcerers who are possessed by entities, and they willingly become possessed through rituals. They invite those entities to possess them, and these are secret societies that are very aware of this, but most of them are just corrupted at a young age, otherwise they wouldn't be involved. So these family lines are very, very powerful. The European sorcerers have taken over. Um, they came to this continent, the US, and conquered the sorcerers here. And now we're being run by very powerful family bloodlines that are fully possessed by a variety of entities. And so there's two different types of power. There's power in this life, and there's power in the afterlife. Toltecs seek power in the afterlife, and these other types of sorcerers seek power in this life. And they're willing to do anything and everything in order to have power. And the Toltecs, even at one point, got lost in power. And what we call the old sorcerers, they would control people. The more people they could control, the more power they would get. And that's what we're dealing with in the European sorcerers. Um,
It
They
sounds
are,
good.
no, that's, go ahead.
When you say that, it reminds me of musicians who said, "I sold my soul to the devil," and
Yeah.
so to make sure I understand correctly, what you're saying is there are people who perhaps were traumatized at a young age and meant
Mhm.
to believe that if they sold their soul or whatever term we want to use for it, they and did these rituals,
Mhm.
they would assume a tremendous amount of power in this life. And so they rise to positions of authority in various different ways, if that's
Sure.
correct.
Yeah.
And how does music play into this?
Yeah, I mean, you know, music is a very powerful healing tool that's been misused against us in a sense that, the frequency in which it's played and different things. So because these puppets run humanity, or these puppeteers run us like puppets, these um, kind of like the Grateful Dead was designed to ensnare people and get them to just stay inside of that world for so many years and decades. And the CIA was involved in creating that because it's easy to control people, through Hollywood and through music. And I love the Dead. I'm not saying that, to me, it's a double-edged sword. Like with Twitter, it's like a trap, but it's also a place to learn and talk to people and have conversations. But it's designed to eventually control us.
Wait, sorry. So I think what you're saying is, just go back to the Grateful Dead for one moment here. Are you saying because of the Merry Pranksters and Ken Kesey and the acid tests that this was kind of planned, if you
Mhm.
will, that the dead were created in such a way to ensnare people? If,
Yeah, yeah. Like Robert Hunter was this, like he was presented with the task of writing lyrics and in a way that would, they gave him the prompts on what they wanted him to write. He was involved in these government systems. I think they're all kind of useful idiots. They didn't realize they just couldn't, like bands don't get to stay that big and keep putting out albums and stuff unless they're kind of going along with the show. Like even authors and stuff, there's like a gatekeeping that's happening. Now it's starting to shift, and the best sellers are starting to be people like, potentially Mark Gober and stuff. So I'm not saying that it's going to stay that way. In fact, there's a desire for authenticity and people are starting to see through the control systems. But yeah, there's a lot of manipulation that occurs with the way lyrics and systems are created, and it's not just through people controlling them. It's also the puppeteers just running these systems through individuals.
so if I understand you correctly, this reminds me of the Tavistock Institute.
Yeah.
So for those that don't know, Tavistock Institute was a powerful force that came out of Great Britain in conjunction with America, but other countries as well. And essentially it was creating propaganda and ways to control people through culture.
Yeah.
And you say the Grateful Dead. I happened to read an article recently that the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the
Yep.
Doors,
Big
bands
time.
that I love, these were created in some ways to ensnare people, keep their vibration frequency down, keep them focused on materialism,
Mhm.
um, mostly narcissism, really, hedonism. Would that be one way of describing what's going on here with all these different musical acts?
Yeah, I mean, not everyone, there are some natural organic things happening, but a lot of these, yeah, those bands that had so much influence were uh they were being controlled, and manipulated to create this dynamic. And so it's unfortunate, but like Don Juan would take Carlos into these other worlds, and one of the worlds was like all these people just bathing in this light and candles, and there was like presence of this feeling of God. And Carlos just got down on his knees and wept and was just, I don't want to leave. This is so beautiful. And Don Juan had to like slap him. He's like, dude, you're such a fool. This is just another trap.
Yeah.
Everything's a trap. And until you see that, now I go to tons of music and I don't avoid the bands that are controlled because some of the best music comes out of these bands. And so it's just a matter of coming to terms with that side of it. And so MK Ultra is very real, and a lot of people don't even realize to the degree that they're being used because they do something called honeycombing, where they'll give you like LSD and compartmentalize your create compartments within your being in which you can be manipulated through dreams. And there's powerful sorcerers that intervene upon people in their dream time in order to plant inception, in order for them to then write lyrics that they think are theirs, but in reality, there was an inception process that occurred.
Wow, well, that's a fascinating idea. And speaking of predictive programming, we have movies like Inception that allow us to speak in these terms.
Yeah.
Um, just want to go back here for just a moment. So, um, for those that don't know, what is MK Ultra, and
Mhm.
how does that fit into the TV show Stranger Things, which again seems like predictive programming to me?
Yeah, I mean, anything that's pushed on humanity on a level like that is part of an MK Ultra program. And in the 70s, MK Ultra was proven in court to be a real thing, which is that the CIA was, basically putting humanity under hypnosis by putting leaders of bands or movies or government under hypnosis, and then those leaders would then hypnotize people unknowingly or knowingly. It's hard to explain. I don't claim to understand it. I haven't studied MK Ultra to the degree that I just intuit and understand it as, something that was revealed. And then this idea that CIA would stop doing this, right? So that was the court case that said, okay, well, you kind of caught us, so we're going to not do it anymore. But then it just went into hyper mode. They just totally, and that whole court case was probably an MK Ultra program to
Yeah,
reveal to humanity, hey, you're being fucked with, and to see how they respond. And there was no response. Everyone's just like, huh? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I think that's the saddest part of all of this, that much of this information is available to us.
yeah.
Um, whether or not people choose to believe what you're saying is true, I would also say that many people um, continue to go along with whatever programming they've been raised to believe, and they don't question it. They're not curious. They're not interested in this type of stuff. But it's interesting. I was having a conversation yesterday, actually, with some friends, and they were very much not of this wavelength, and they have no interest in these types of discussions. They live very much on the surface, and I think there are definitely people that proceed in that way. Um, but I would like to go back to the Toltecs because you've mentioned them many times in this interview.
Mhm.
What are the Toltecs, and how did you get involved with this?
Yeah, so Toltec, there's different versions of what Toltec means. For some people, it means a bloodline that you're born of a particular ancient Mexico ancestry. But for Carlos Castaneda and Don Juan, it meant a Toltec is one that has learned the art of dreaming. Um, and so you don't have to be of a particular bloodline to become a Toltec. It's like a rite of passage. You become a Toltec when you learn the Toltec dreaming arts, and they're the dreaming arts of the Toltec are different than the dreaming arts of people that come out of Uzbekistan or different areas of the world. So it does originate from Mexico. Um, And it's very, the shamans of Mexico, of ancient Mexico were very, very powerful beings, probably the most powerful beings on Earth at the time, thousands of years ago. So, the Toltec lineage has a dark past, but the new seers realized that they got caught. And so like a new version of Toltec happened at some point in history, and they realized that they had to stop misusing their power or they would be destroyed. And in fact, I think the European sorcerers that came over and conquered the sorcerers of ancient Mexico were it was almost like a karmic deal that needed to happen because the Toltecs had misused their power. And then that's how they really learned to become powerful is under the attack, the conquistadors put them in a position where they had to free themselves in the most unique ways because there was an incredible effort to destroy the Toltec knowledge because it's a threat to the sorcerers of Europe So Castaneda is the reason I encountered the Toltec knowledge. And then I met Carol Tiggs, who's the Nawal woman inside of the Castaneda material. And she's a very otherworldly woman. And when you're in the presence of someone like her, you realize that this is like luminous energy that is passed on to apprentices. Those that can receive this knowledge will be like almost downloaded, kind of like in martial arts, the old magical teachers in the old school stuff, they would transmit or pass their power on to their predecessors, not just with words, but through an actual illuminate. You exchange luminosity, and so you start to look like your teacher. You start to share so much affection and gratitude that you start to take on, and then you can even remember their memories. So you become connected to them.
When you say that, it makes me think of going back to the conquistadors and Mexico or just South America in general. It seems to me that we've been misled as to our history, as to what's
Mhm.
going on. What are your ideas about our understanding of history? Because if what you're saying is accurate, then the way that we go about daily life is completely wrong.
Yeah.
And it's our whole conception of why we're here, what's really going on, is completely inaccurate. What are your thoughts about history?
Yeah, I mean, they're ancient. The technology is not new. Technology is just magic, a different version of magic. And we go through these resets. But I think the flyers intervened upon us at a certain point. But we used to have really beautiful, magical civilizations with incredible technology and awareness. And somehow all of that has been systematically hidden from us, and it's starting to come out. People are realizing what we're told is not true, and it doesn't make any sense. And so it's just a matter of breaking out of hypnosis and starting to be open and considering. So I think there was a time where there were giants, massive beings, you know, different. Maybe the vapor canopy was here at one point, and so we grew into massive heights and became really huge creatures. And the moon and the sun were in different, doing different things at different times. The Toltecs say that our history, Don Juan would constantly challenge Carlos and say, so yeah, 10,000 years ago, this and happened. And he's like, that's not what I learned in college. And Don Juan says, I don't care what you learned in college. Like that means nothing to me. Like, but Don Juan would, or Carlos would just fight back. He's like, what are you talking about? How could they lie? Or so, yeah, we've been deceived on every level so that, because one truth leads to all truth. So no truths can be allowed in because it'll eventually seed the awakening.
Right.
So everything has to be inverted. And so especially ancient civilizations have to be hidden. We believe in this idea that we were, you know, um, the medieval ages and all that stuff. I think it's all made up.
One final question, and then I'd love to have you back to talk about so many more things. You talked earlier about controlling your dreams.
Hmm.
Picture in our minds, what would this look like if you became, and maybe you already do this, you're a master of your dreams. What does that look like?
So there's these dreaming gates. And if you can learn to be aware in your dreams, like one of the first things to maybe do is to realize you're in a dream. And then you could look at your hands. And then you start to look around and realize everything's starting to move and shift. There's a way to sort of just become aware enough that you can consciously go to sleep in that dream and lay down in a particular position. So if you lay down on your left side in the dream, you'll wake up in a deeper layer of the dream. You'll move into you'll pass a dreaming gate, and now you're in a much more intense version of dreaming. If you could then do that again in that dream, you would wake up in a deeper layer. So the movie Inception was taken from Castaneda material, as was The Matrix, as was pretty much all these powerful movies. So, but they kind of changed it, and they made it more palatable for people that understand the depths of the shamanic side of it. So, if you wake up in the third gate of dreaming, Toltecs say that world is more real than this one. So whenever I wake up in the third grade of dreaming, it's so incredible and I feel so alive that I instantly panic and I come out of it because it's too intense. So I'm having to learn how to handle and not react, and it's very difficult.
You say intense, like intense how?
Just so amazing, just so much joy, so much connection, so alive that it's just uncomfortably and it's so exhilarating that it shocks you, or me, at least me and most. It just feels it's too much energy moving through you. We're not used to that. We have to become empty enough. If you have blocks in your emotional blocks or wounds, it's going to be really difficult to handle the intensity. So joy, it can take you out just as much as pain.
It's very interesting. Okay, I feel like I could talk to you for a much, much longer time. I'd love to have you back. Real quick, I think you have a course that you're offering, and or how can people follow your work and learn more about what you're talking about today?
Yeah, I'm just starting a brand new course called Resilience, and you can find me at joelschafer.com and sign up there. I have a YouTube channel called Perceiver. And then, I do free consults. So you can just find my Instagram or which is joel.schafer. So it's Schafer. Um, yeah, I do in-person courses as well in Montana. So in April 5th and 6th, and then there'll be additional days going to the mountains with me on the 7th and the 8th. Really powerful. So yeah, the online courses Sundays at noon Mountain Time and Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. So for different time zone options. And yeah, we're just getting started, and there's a bunch of really incredible people in there that have been training with me for a little bit now. So it's not just me that you're going to benefit from hanging out with. There's some really powerful older women that have been doing this work a long time, and they really honor me by continuing to show up to my training. So yeah, it's a lot of opportunities, and I do mentoring, 90-minute sessions at sliding scale, and that's what most of my time is spent doing is helping people to heal emotions and to get honest about what's going on with them. And or I teach the shamanic movements as well. And so my courses consist of the movements, recapitulation, which is a breath practice that allows you to review your life in a magical way and to reclaim your essence from the past, and also purge any energy splinters that you took on from people like an ex-lover. And that's the Toltecs premise is that if we can recapitulate our lives, then we don't have to die a normal death. The force that normally consumes awareness at death will let you move on to the next stage.
That's actually something I meant I want to ask you about. So next time we're going to talk about recapitulation. But I just want to say thank you so much, Joel. This was fascinating. I can't wait to talk to you again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael. Good to be with you. See you next time.